Chief Ranalli, thanks for staying and doing a little extra talk on the web here. We were talking about traffic stops just before. That's the way that most marijuana possession arrests happen. That people are stopped for traffic and the smell of it is in the car. Is it usually possession in the case like that, or are people smoking in their cars?
Well, it's both. Parking lots of bars or things that people might be smoking in the cars. So it's kind of a mixture of both. Cars seem to be the place where it happens a lot.
I know some proponents for legalization would say, A, that people are not as reckless when they're smoking under the influence or when they're driving under the influence of marijuana as they are compared to under the influence of alcohol. The old joke is that you go 25 miles an hour in the fast lane of the throughway instead of, zipping at 100 miles an hour. And that others would say, well, people are forced to smoke in their cars because it's illegal, and if your neighbors could smell it if it's coming through the next apartment and could call the police, and all of a sudden you get in trouble. It's a confined space where they can actually do that. The rationalization being that neither one of those would be as significant a problem if it was legalized and people had other places and other venues where they could smoke or consume marijuana. Do you agree with either of those viewpoints?
No, because again, it goes to the argument, or it goes against the whole point of what I said earlier. And if you're going to legalize it, it shouldn't be a point of making things more convenient for people. When you look at Civic Center Park, I believe it's called, in Denver, on April 20th of any given day or of any given year, they expect, I believe last year they were expecting upwards of 80,000 people in there. And when you look at the pictures, there was just a pall of smoke over it. How many of those 80,000 people got in the cars and drove afterward? Where was the commentary about that? Not as reckless. I'd like to see the studies that say that it doesn't affect you. And it shouldn't be. When you're talking about, we have to set priorities first. What many of the people want with legalized marijuana is the convenience of being able to smoke pot legally, not having to worry about it, do it anywhere they want. Versus there is in fact an impairment level with marijuana. It does affect you and your human being and their brain. So until that is addressed, and you had asked about, is there any type of testing or anything that would satisfy, say, myself or the chiefs in general? And right now there is not, because the problem is that, again, the difficulties with the standardized field sobriety testing we already discussed. But even if you get a blood or a urine test from somebody, it's also very difficult to tell and determine any level of impairment per se, as you can with alcohol. You get a specific blood alcohol content. You can't really do that. You can get a positive hit with the way blood tests are done now, or tests are done now. You can get a positive hit for days afterwards.
Wouldn't impairment, though, be best judged by somebody's performance, how they're driving? If somebody's driving recklessly, that's the indication of impairment.
But they don't have to be driving recklessly. Here, that's the problem, and that's what people don't understand, is that if I were to take this cup and throw it at you, you would react within a certain time because you're here, you're at work, you're not impaired by anything. You would respond appropriately. But what people don't understand is that there are, as far as I know, there are plenty of studies that show that marijuana will, in fact, affect your ability to change gear, your attention. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like saying you might as well just start texting and doing other things because you're less likely to pay attention. So now a car pulls out in front of you, or a pedestrian crosses the street in a city environment, and because of that impairment, you don't respond the same way that you would have but for having smoked marijuana. How do we accurately test that? How do we go about it? Marijuana also reduces inhibitions. So, again, I'm not going to say that they're wrong. I'm going to say that I would like to see the science behind those statements, that you're not as reckless. And even if that's true, not as reckless, well, what's an acceptable level?
But we do, as a society, permit some impairments, or at least people, we give them the opportunity to impair themselves, so to speak. Drinking is legal
Absolutely.
Although there are all rules about when you're allowed to, what the maximum is that you're allowed to consume before you operate a motor vehicle, there are plenty of prescription medications that impair people's judgments, and there are thresholds under which the law says you can't be this level of impairment. Why the difference on this drug, and how do you counter the argument from people who say, well, if you're going to allow alcohol and if you're going to allow people to take prescription drugs, why not also give them that ability to smoke marijuana and determine for themselves? Put the onus on them to not be impaired or...
And if people would accept that, accept it and shoulder that responsibility, if there are people that can, obviously, but there are a lot that won't. And I have children, they drive. I hope they have children, they drive. There's a lot of irresponsible people. There are also a lot of people that follow the law, in other words, say, don't choose not to smoke marijuana because it is, in fact, illegal right now. Do we want to, with the lack of any real scientific proof one way or another in many, many areas with marijuana, do we now want to, by the enactment of laws which are reflections of our society's values, do we want to now almost encourage people to do it? And I don't think we're there yet. I just don't think. Those problems you described are huge. The prescription drug problem, huge. Again, very, very difficult for us to enforce. I believe it was in 2012, I might be wrong on that, but the abuse of prescription drugs illegally taken exceeded for the first time the use of illegal drugs, heroins and cocaines and so forth. So that shows us that even with the controls that we have over our prescription system and controlled substances, we don't have the ability to accurately or to competently police that, so to speak, no pun intended, but because the drugs are out there. So that's why even allowing the medical marijuana that could be smoked, as they have in those other states, as we had previously talked about, that's not the model to follow. Because if you're doing it strictly for medical purposes, then you do it the way New York has done it right now. And you back into it slowly, you study what's going on in the other states. But to jump right into it and say we're going to allow you to smoke it for medical purposes, you're just essentially opening the door for a lot of abuse. So I guess I think we have a problem with the signal that it would send by legalizing it, and almost an encouragement, as it is now. Polydrug use is huge, even with it illegal.
Polydrug use?
Concurrently.
Two drugs at once.
Concurrent use of drugs, 2 drugs at once. When we end up doing a lot of like drug recognition experts, when they usually, it ends with a blood test. Or if we have serious physical injury or death accidents, fatal accidents, blood is usually drawn. Very, very, very common to see multiple drugs coming back in the system, not just alcohol, but marijuana as well, or other types of antidepressants. Which also goes to a whole nother area of if we're going to allow a drug to become legal, if any state allows a drug to become legal, what's the impact on the mentally ill? What's the impact on people that, for instance, New York State is, I believe, one of the few states that does not allow assisted outpatient treatment of people that are mentally ill. In other words, they need medication, but we can't force it on them if they're not, there's not that many institutions anymore. So we don't allow that. So, but are we then going to pass a law that the logical consequences, those people can now self-medicate themselves with a freely available drug that's taxed and almost encouraged by the government? I mean, there's a lot of...
Can't people in the current setup where it's illegal really choose to self-medicate themselves as well? I mean, one of the other arguments in all of this that you're well aware of as a police chief is that it's probably the most widely available illegal drug. It's for
Oh, yeah.
kids and for kids who report it's easier to get marijuana in school than it is to get alcohol because you got to go to a store and show ID, and those stores have an incentive to not provide you alcohol or cigarettes if you're not of age. I mean, it's pretty easy to get marijuana today in New York State if you want to.
It is, but there's just something, maybe it's just me, but there's just something inherently objectionable to just saying, because it's such a problem anyway, we should just give up. Again, it's a matter of, do we want, is that the message we want to send as a society? And I personally, maybe it's clearly probably biased after spending virtually all of my adult life in law enforcement,
But I'm sure you can see the dilemma, because most of the issues that you've brought up exist today. It's just a matter of whether it's done legally or whether it's done, on a street corner somewhere or in some hidden room somewhere. Mm-hmm. So, we're still facing all of those challenges that you described right now.
We are. I'm just trying not to make it any worse than it is. And that's essentially what would happen if you're, when you look at the lines and outside of the dispensaries or whatever they're called in Colorado. And I just, again, understand every life is perspective. Mm-hmm. Everybody has their, you have yours, I have mine. Mine is, again, based on my entire adult life in law enforcement and truly caring about the public. And, I became an attorney. I decided to stay in law enforcement because this is where my passion is. So it troubles me to see states like Washington and Colorado just jump into something like this and put people at risk.
There are always questions about the use or proper use of police manpower and police time and energy. We report on marijuana busts from time to time. You'll see the big bales of marijuana being carted off and burned and big arrests like that. Is it something of a drain on police departments, the enforcement of marijuana? You said most of them are done through car stops, so they're sort of found unexpectedly.
Those are a lot of the lower level, mm-hmm. Not sale, the possession, criminal possession, or the violation, unlawful possession. Clearly, we also get into investigations of dealers mm-hmm. as well. Any type of drug investigation can be pretty involved. And a lot of people are more apt to sell marijuana, perpetuating the problem, just because the gravity of the crime is less in the penal law as compared to selling controlled substances. So is it a drain on manpower? Just like anything else, do we go out, realistically, do we go out actively trying to find marijuana arrests and dealers? No, it's incidental to our duties. We had a recent one where we did investigate a dealer, but what brought the whole thing to our attention was the dealer was growing increasingly paranoid and drew out a shotgun and pointed it at somebody he's selling it at. That person ultimately came to us, mm-hmm. and that's what led to the investigation. So we were more concerned about the risks that somebody like that imposed.
And for those who would say, if you legalize it, you take the inherent violence or the arms race aspect of it out of the picture because it's a legal process?
I can't tell you whether this person would have been of proper mind, whether it was illegal or illegal. I don't know. Or was it the excessive use that was described by mm-hmm. People once we got into the investigation that caused that, which is consistent with what some studies have shown. But
final topic that I wanted to get into with you. There are always, it's been my experience in covering issue after issue on shows like this, there's almost always a happy medium somewhere. Somebody says, yes, you should do one thing, and somebody else says, no, you shouldn't do this thing. And then in the middle, there's usually a compromise area. Is there, to your mind, any compromise or any middle ground that would provide some of the protections for public safety that you're concerned about while also offering protection from prosecution and from arrest to people who want to partake in this? Is there a middle ground?
Not if it is solely in the context of a limited legislative package that is just going to legalize, to some extent, marijuana. if there's part of a larger, say, committee or whatever, where you have people from mental health profession, law enforcement, and if you can actually do a comprehensive package, try and develop a comprehensive package, scientific community, and actually look at the problem and make an educated decision rather than one just from the ballots. I just don't agree with that. Then we would look at it. We are not no for the sake of no. We're no because of the legitimate concerns that we feel we have.
Police Chief Michael Ranalli, I really appreciate you coming in and talking with us. Thanks so much.
Okay.